On the third day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now there were set there 6 water pots full of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water." And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Draw some out now and take it to the master of the feast." And they took it. When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom, and he said to him, "Every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You have kept the good wine until now." This beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this he went down to Capernaum, he, his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they did not stay there many days. Let's take some time this morning and look at this particular text. This is the first miracle, not only recorded, but I think the Bible is indicative of the fact that this is the first miracle that Jesus ever performed. This would be contrary to some of the apocryphal accounts of the Lord. Some of the apocryphal Gospels have Jesus performing miracles as a child. Obviously, those things would have to be rejected out of hand as, for lack of a better term, mythological, fictional, however you would want to describe that. And so, in other words, just as an aside, there are some ways that we can know many of the apocryphal books are not inspired and do not belong in the biblical text, because they contradict other texts that we know did come by way of inspiration. And so we have this wedding feast in Cana of Galilee. Cana, I think, as best we can tell, it's not a well-known. In fact, I don't even know that they know exactly where Cana was. There's some archaeological evidence that might point to some areas, but Cana is mentioned here, and Cana is mentioned in John 21. But other than that, nowhere in between. And so we don't know exactly where they were, but it was likely very close. I would say likely very close to Capernaum. But in any event, just to kind of give us an idea of where this is going on, and again, Capernaum would have been close to Nazareth, and the reason I mention that is that if there is a wedding and Jesus is invited, and his disciples are invited, and his mother is invited, then it would seem to me that was probably, wherever that wedding was probably pretty close to where they lived. And in other words, just the events surrounding a ceremony like that would have probably indicated it was close to the hometown of the Lord. And then we find in the course of this banquet, so to speak, that they have run out of wine, and you find here in verse number 3 that his mother, which, by the way, John never mentions Jesus' mother by name. He always refers to her as the mother of Jesus, or his mother. He never calls her Mary. In fact, when you read all the accounts of Mary, in John's gospel, they are either Mary, the wife of Clopas, or Mary Magdalene. And in fact, there's one event in the life of Jesus where his mother and Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene are all present at the same time. And so, and I believe it was at the cross. There's three, as we know, there's three Marys there, but the Mary, the mother of Jesus, is never mentioned by name in John's account, not here or anywhere else in his account. And this is going to come into play because it says the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Now, why would she say that to Jesus? But how did she know that? I mean, but you think about the oddity that it presents. Jesus has never performed a miracle. He's never demonstrated an inclination to perform a miracle, and yet out of the blue, at a wedding feast, his mother says, "They have no wine." And then note his response, "Woman, what does that have to do with me? What does that have to do with me?" Now, I want to make a note here with regard to the use of the word "woman." Jesus was not using it in the way that we would use it in colloquial terms. Like, if I'm going on with Rhonda, so to speak, I'm gonna say, "Woman," and she knows I'm just going on with her. All right, but sometimes that word in our colloquial use might mean a man that doesn't have a lot of respect for his wife. In other words, it can be used in a very serious way, or a negative way. But in this case, this is not. Neither one of these is the use of the word that Jesus employs here. The word here is gune, which is the same word as is rendered wife. And what I'm telling you is that the word has a variety of usages, and the context is going to determine usage. And we need to understand that when Jesus used this term in this verse, he was not being disrespectful to his mother at all. Because if you will recall, when Jesus was hanging on the cross, and the Bible says, and his mother was standing there, and the disciple whom he loved, what did he say? He said, "Woman, behold thy son." In other words, he used that terminology right there. "Woman, behold thy son. Son, behold thy mother." And obviously, Jesus was not using it in a negative way there, and he was not using it in a negative way here. And so that's the first thing we want to understand. Secondly, there may have been a point. There may have been a point behind it. In other words, it may be the case that Jesus had referred to Mary as mother for the better part of his life, perhaps even all the way up to that particular point in time. And then a change of terminology may have been used or employed here to indicate that there's going to be a separation now. That obviously Jesus had been taking care of his mother up to this point in time, right? I mean, he's the oldest. That's the responsibility of the oldest child. I think it's obvious that Joseph is dead. Joseph has not been invited to this wedding. It wouldn't have been. Doesn't seem that it would have been appropriate in Jewish culture to invite a woman to a wedding without inviting her husband, or for her to go without her husband. And so I think to me it seems apparent that Joseph is dead. Jesus, having the responsibility as the oldest son, has been taking care of his mother up to this point in time, but now it's time for that to draw to a close. In other words, the true purpose of his coming is about to be revealed. And so it may have been that Jesus was using this terminology to indicate also to her You know, and it may be like a double-edged sword. All right, you want me to perform a miracle, right, but you need to understand something. When I perform a miracle, my relationship with you is going to change forever, right? You know, you don't just get to perform a miracle and then act like nothing happened. Especially when a lot of people are going to know about it, and the word's going to get out. I mean, all those servants that drew that water and brought the water, they knew what the Bible says. They knew where the wine came from, and they knew how it happened, or they put two and two together. You know, they didn't see Jesus touch the water or speak over the water or say anything about the water pots. All they know is that his mother said, whatever he tells you to do, you do it. And he said, fill them with water and then draw some out. And by the time they got to where, whenever they got to where they were going, they knew. And so word's going to get out. And so it may be the case that Jesus is showing as an indication by performing the miracle and using the terminology that he's indicating to her that our relationship is fixing to change forever. By the way, this would not be the only time this had happened in his ministry. You remember early in his ministry as he's teaching and performing miracles, the people came and they said, your mother and your brothers are outside. And that, by the way, that's another reason I believe that Joseph is dead. Your mother and your brothers are outside and they want to talk to you. And what did he say? Who is my mother? Who is my brother? Whoever does what I say, the same as my brother, my sister, and my mother. And so this may have been the first, but it certainly wasn't the only time that Jesus drew a line that says my relationship with my family is severed because I have a greater job to do. And then yet at the very end of his life, he comes back to that responsibility as he hangs on the cross to make sure that his mother is cared for. And that's really, that's one of the last things he ever did was made sure that his mother was going to be taken care of. And so that's the situation we don't. A lot of this, for lack of a better term, I would just call it informed speculation. In other words, based on what we know, we can speculate a few things, but we wouldn't certainly hold those as being absolutely right. I also had as a note written on the side in Luke 2:19 and Luke 2:51, we find a phrase used in regard to Mary twice, or a descriptive phrase with direct connection to Mary. Look at Luke 2:19. Look at Luke 2:51. All right, what's going on in Luke 2 and about verse 19? What's going on here in Luke 2:19? He was born and visited by shepherds. And it says, they made widely known the saying which was told them concerning this child, and all those who heard it marveled at those things which were told them by the shepherds. But Mary did what? Kept all of them in her heart. Now Luke 2:51. What's the situation here? What's going on? In the immediate context, somebody has said something to her. Submissive. Jesus was submissive to his parents, but what did he say to his parents right before that? I must be about my father's business, and his earthly stepfather was still alive, right? And so, obviously, being in the temple was not being about Joseph's business, it's being about God the Father's business, right? And then what does it say about Mary in 2:51? Kept them in her heart. Yeah. And by the way, these are not the only two indicators that involve Mary. Mary went to visit Elizabeth right after the angel appeared to her, and went to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth was 6 months pregnant. And the first words out of her mouth, Elizabeth's mouth, was, "The mother of my Lord." The mother of my Lord. And so Mary had a lot, obviously.
As she approached.
Right.
As she approached, she walked up and she mentioned the mother of my Lord.
Yeah, the mother of my Lord.
What do you do when you walk in and someone says that?
That's right. Mary could not have been pregnant but more than just a handful of days. A handful of days. Because she went and stayed 6 months. Or 3 months with Elizabeth, and then comes back. All right? And so, but the point is that things have been happening in Mary's life all the way from the time that the angel appeared to her, and that she went to see Elizabeth, when they brought Jesus to the temple, and Simeon and Anna, where we get the phrase, "I can die," let your servant part in peace. In other words, I can die now. That's what he was saying. I can die now. You promised I'd see the Christ, and I've seen the Christ. I can die now. So a lot of things have been going on in Mary's life up to this point in time. And then there's this, there's this giant period of silence for about 18 years. But let's not kid ourselves. Jesus was no ordinary child. He was no ordinary child. He was no ordinary preteen. He was no ordinary teenager. He was no ordinary young adult. And Mary certainly would have recognized all of these things, especially when you raise that one first, and then you get about 6 or 7 after that, right? Rhonda will tell you, raising Shelby was very little training for raising Jeffrey. They just weren't the same. And I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm just saying there was a big difference in raising a girl, a firstborn girl, and then raising a boy. It's just not the same. And so you raise Jesus, and then you raise about 3 brothers behind him and some sisters. And those boys are just like all other boys, right? Except we've still got this exception out here in Jesus. And so all of this has been building up to this point in time. And so, and think about this. Think about this statement. Right. They have no wine. What does this have to do with me? Then what is the next thing we say? What is the next thing that we see? What happens? Now, there's one thing that happens in here. She says to Jesus, they've run out of wine. Jesus says to her, what is that to me? What's the next statement that we find in the text? She don't say a word to Jesus. What? But what would you have done? You'd have run that mouth. Yeah. But what's the point? Did she argue with Jesus about it? Did she beg Jesus about it? She just turned to some people and said, "Hey, whatever he says to you, do it." Basically, she put an onus on Jesus, didn't she?
Was that not a usurping authority?
No. She's still his mama. Still his mama. He's 30. He's 30. Whatever he says to you, do it. She didn't say, now, you go tell them to do something, and I'm going to go tell them to do what you tell them to do. No. She turns to somebody completely different and says, whatever he says to you, do it. Out the door she goes. Back to the reception, back to the banquet.
She knew he had enough respect for her to figure it.
That's the only thing I can figure, Ann, is that she knew who, in just about every possible way that a human being could know, she knew exactly who she was dealing with. And that means not only the physical side, but also the divine side. or not only the human side, but the divine side. And so to me, it's an incredible exchange if you just want to sit and think about it and ponder it just for a few minutes to think about how all of that went down. And so, and then what did he say? Fill the water pots full of water. Somewhere between 120 and 180 gallons of water. That's a lot of water.
And then on top of that was a lot of wine.
Right. I mean, the monetary value of what was created was through the roof. If you just want, for that day and time, but then not only to supply, but to supply something that was far greater or better.
Where would you got that much wine at one time all in front of them?
That's exactly right.
You're talking about pressing, gathering.
Yeah. And by the way, and the water pots were empty. The water pots were empty. They had to go draw 180 gallons of water and fill those water, or 120 at the very least. It says 20 or 30 apiece. So let's just say there's a mixture of 20 to 30. So let's just put her down the middle and say 150. They got to go draw 150 gallons of water. And then Jesus says, draw the water out and carry it to the master of the feast. And so, again, it doesn't say that he did anything else other than tell them to fill the water pots. But yet a miracle was performed, which tells us that it's like it reminds me of the situation with Naaman in 2 Kings 5, when the prophet tells his servant, "Hey, just go out there and tell him to go wash in the Jordan 7 times. Tell him to go out there and plunge himself under the water in the Jordan 7 times." And his first response is, "I thought that the prophet was going to come out and strike his hands over the sky and heal." In other words, he had it in his mind that some great, he had to, the prophet had to put his hands on him or hit him with a stick or make some big show or to do. And it was just as simple as go dip in the Jordan 7 times. That's the power of God. God doesn't have to make a big show. God doesn't have to make a big show to get done what he wants to get done. And so in this case, Jesus says, just fill them up. And when he did,
let light be and light was.
let there be light. Let there be light. There was light. I mean, just it's.
Think about when they drew it out of the well, it was water. When they took it out of the barrel, it was water. And when they delivered it, when they took it out and delivered it to the master, it was still water. So the miracle happened sometime. Mostly when you got it in your cup or when you go to turn it up. And then,
Yeah. Well, and the servants would have taken that water out of the water pots, put it in a pitcher, and then carried the pitcher back into the banquet, and then poured wine. In other words, there was no sleight of hand involved. I mean, they put the water in the water pot, they put the water in the pitcher, and they poured out wine into the glass of the master of the feast. In other words, they knew that something had happened from this point in time to this point in time. And the guy that told us to fill those water pots wasn't anywhere around, so to speak. You see. Man, I hadn't even thought about that, Jeremiah, but that's exactly right. He said, Matt, what would have gone on in their minds when they filled a water pot full of water and then put water in a pitcher, thinking that they're toting water. I mean, we're fixing to walk in here and pour water in this guy's glass. And it's like, I never thought about that, but in their minds. But again, it goes back to whatever he tells you to do it. Whatever he tells you to do it. Just, man, I never thought about that, Jeremiah, but that's a great observation. Oh yeah, they had to be scared to death. Gonna walk out. Well, here's the thing. It wasn't on them. It was on the bridegroom. Because it was on whoever was in charge of the ceremony, the banquet. Yeah. Would have been embarrassment. And so.
To what degree is this wine, when you get wine that's not fermented, some others too?
Well, the word, and that's the last part of this discussion, is that the word that is used here is a very general word. It's the word oinos. And the best way for us to understand, again, just like anything else, we've talked about mother. The word for mother is used in a variety of contexts, and context has to determine meaning. Well, oinos is used in a variety of contexts, and one of the best ways for us to understand how it's being used is to look at, one of the first ways is to read the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, and it was done by Hebrews. In other words, it's not people who studied Hebrew and then translated the Hebrew Scriptures. It's people who were Hebrews who spoke the language. And 70. And by the way, it was 70 Jewish scholars who translated this Hebrew text into Greek. All right, and so. They would have, and they did. They used this exact word in a variety of ways in the Old Testament text, Isaiah 65 and other places. And sometimes it refers to fresh squeezed grape juice. But in other instances, it's found wine is a mocker and strong drink is raging, and whoever is deceived thereby is not wise. Proverbs 20 and verse 1. Well, in that context, in the Septuagint, oinos is obviously not fresh squeezed grape juice because it's used in the direct connection context with strong drink, some type of what we call a liquor of some type. Wine is a mocker and strong drink is raging. Who hath sorrow? Who hath redness of eyes? Those that linger long at the wine. So the Septuagint used this same word in a variety of contexts. The Septuagint talked about the wine while it was still in the grape. The oinos. The oinos that's still in the grape. And so context has to determine usage. So now we go to oinos is used in this context. It's rendered wine. It's rendered as wine. But that doesn't mean it's wine in the sense that we think about wine. It could have been. From a technical standpoint, it could have been. But the question would then be this. Does the context seem to indicate that Jesus made 150 gallons of alcoholic beverages? Doesn't seem to. Note that the text says that the guests had well drunk. Doesn't say they were well drunk. Doesn't mean they were drunk. It means they had consumed a lot of oinos. They were full. And yet, whatever it was that Jesus produced was noticeably better even after they were full than when they first started. Now, we all got a dose of this. About 2 weeks ago on Thanksgiving. The first bite of turkey is the best one. Not the 100th bite. Even though it's the same turkey, right? The first bite's the best. The first bite of the mashed potatoes is best, and not the 20th bite. The first piece of, if you like pumpkin pie, I don't. I'll just say pecan since I like. The first piece of pecan pie is better than the second one. Why? Because there's the anticipation of the eating, and then look, once you get full, food just doesn't taste as good as it did before. So what do we have here? We have a bunch of people who have already eaten and consumed a lot of oinos. And yet, the quality of what it is that Jesus created was noticeably better. Look, I mean, think about it this way. You might make the best pecan pie in the whole world. All right? You may make the best pecan pie in the whole world. But if you let me eat 2 plates of turkey and potatoes and gravy and a roll, and then a piece of pecan pie that's just a regular pecan pie, am I going to know that the pecan pie that you've given me is the best pecan pie in the world? I'm not going to have the ability to make that discernment because I'm full. I'm full. Look, I'm going to use a really crude example, all right? And by crude, I don't mean dirty. I just mean earthly. When guys go, especially in college students, young guys, whatever, when they go to a bar and they're going to drink beer, the first pitcher of beer that they buy is going to be good beer. All right? But then they don't want to spend all night spending money on good beer. So once they've consumed a pitcher of good beer, guess what they're going to buy from there on out? Cheap beer. That's how it works. Why? Why? Because what you drink at the first is what you taste the best. And then once you've once you've consumed some, what you drink doesn't matter. Now you're just drinking for the purpose of drinking. Smiling, aren't you, Kyle? You just started with the cheat?
I don't know where you got your information.
What's that?
I don't know where you got your information.
Yeah. Nobody in this room has any idea what I'm talking about. I'm the only one. I'm the only one that has any. Kyle, what are you going to say?
I'm kind of torn on that because there does seem to be, to me, the good wine is to be drank first because after you drink enough good wine, then you can drink right in.
Mm-hmm.
And they did make a discernment at the end of because he said, now you waited till now to bring out the good. Now, to me, it almost seems as if the good wine is brought up first. And people drink enough to where the inferior wine or the wine that is not as, it's not as good as the first can be handled because of.
Well, that's what the guys, that's the point the guy's making, the master.
That's the point that the master's making. He said, I thought we were drinking the good stuff to start because everybody puts the good stuff out first and the bad stuff out second. And why does he put the bad stuff out second? Because you can't taste it like you can the first. So, but what you've served me now is noticeably better. In other words, it had to be so much better that it was even able to overcome a satiated palate. All right, so
So is that fair to say that wine would not have been alcoholic?
that's exactly what I'm saying.
Would it not have been?
It would not have been. Tote.
I've heard 1,000 arguments on this. My question is, does it matter if it was or it wasn't?
Yes, it would, because if these people were already in a state of intoxication, Jesus would have contributed to a greater state of intoxication. And everything that the Bible says about drinking alcohol is negative, except one thing. There is one passage. There's one passage in the Old Testament that speaks about using alcohol in a positive way. It says, "Give strong drink to him that is dying." In other words, just like on a battlefield, you might give a shot of morphine to some soldier, but he ain't gonna make it. But you're not gonna let him lay there and suffer. What's that? What? What's that, Bobby?
Experience and tradition.
I disagree with you.
On what?
I disagree with you on history, tradition, and experience.
But the question is, do you have any Bible?
But we're getting away from the true miracle point of new
Jewish,
wine.
Jews, they drank wine. They didn't drink grape juice, they
That-
drank wine.
Bobby, I've got a library full of books written by Jewish scholars and Greek scholars that are clear that there were three types of wine that were drunk. One was alcoholic, the other was fresh, and the other was boiled and sealed so as to prohibit fermentation. Three different kinds. And so
I'll agree with you on that.
well, that's good because that's what the Bible teaches. So, yeah, the wilderness of the foyer.
Went back to that well and said, you know, hey man, they're getting wine out of this well. Let's go.
I don't know. Jeremiah.
One real easy comparison. We all went to a restaurant and sat and drank fountain cup. You know, that watered down Coke you get in a restaurant. It does not compare to stop at the gas station and get a bottle of Coke.
That's right.
I mean, there's a noticeable difference.
That's right.
You know, it don't matter how much of that you drink at the restaurant, you can always stop and get you a good drink on the way home, and it's so much better.
That's right. Now, there's a clear process. Goes all the way back prior to the days of Christ. There is a Roman poet. A Roman historian by the name of Virgil. And Virgil lived from 70 BC to 19 BC. And Virgil made it clear that you could prevent fermentation by boiling grape juice to get whatever it is that's in it, get the content out of that, and you could seal that grape juice, and it would keep for long periods of time and never ferment. Because yeah, that's in a form, yes. All right, we'll pick up there next week and do the questions.
I guess both of them make the wake up our life.
What?